.NET 9 has been released, and this is how you upgrade. If you're a Windows user and use Visual Studio 2022, you'll need to update it to version 17.12 or above. To do that, you go to Visual Studio, you go to Help and check for updates. If there's an update available, it will prompt you to update. We're up to date, so we don't need to do that. Updating Visual Studio should download the .NET 9 SDK. If you don't use Visual Studio, or you're a Linux or Mac user, you'll need to download the .NET 9 SDK manually. To do that, you do a search for it and then click on the link. We can now download .NET 9. If we're doing development, we need to download the SDK. The SDK is available in Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. Just remember to download the SDK and not the runtime. The runtime is used when we're running the application on a server. With the SDK installed, we can double check that .NET 9 has been installed successfully on our machine. To do that, we go into a PowerShell window and we run .NET --list -SDKs. If there's a version that begins with 9, then the .NET 9 SDK has been successfully installed. Time to upgrade our project to .NET 9. In this solution, we've got a number of class libraries that we need to update and also a web API. So we're going to open the project file for each of them, and we're going to change the target framework to .NET 9.0. Next, we need to update Microsoft packages that are on version 8. We've got a number here that are using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. We need to update the versions to 9.0.0. And in the web API, we've got one for Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Design. We need to update that to 9.0.0. Now, an easier way of using Visual Studio is just to go onto Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. This will show you all the NuGet packages that need updating. If you use Docker, you'll need to update the Docker file. Let's open up the Docker file. We're going to update the ASP.NET Core Runtime to 9.0. And we'll do the same for the .NET SDK. Coming up, we'll show you how to update your server if you're using IIS to host your application. But first, we need to ensure that our application builds, and that means having a look at some of the .NET 9 break-in changes. The Microsoft website has a web page of all the break-in changes that are in .NET 9. Now, rather going through each one, which would take ages, I'll leave a link for it in the YouTube video description. But there are a couple I want to focus on, which I think you should be aware of. The first one I want to have a look at is the FromKeyServices attribute no longer injects non-key parameter. If we have a look at the previous behavior, when a key service was intended to be injected as a parameter in the service constructor by using the FromKeyServices attribute, and the corresponding key service wasn't registered as a key service, but was registered as a non-keyed service, the non-keyed service was injected instead of throwing an exception. So in this example, they're injecting a keyed service of service 1 with an iService. If this wasn't registered, but this was registered, the non-keyed service would be resolved as part of the dependency injection. But if we have a look at the new behavior, in .NET 9, an invalid operation exception is thrown when the FromKeyServices attribute is used and the specific keyed service isn't found. Now, this was also introduced in 8.0.9 or above. So you might already be aware of this break-in change. The next one I want to have a look at is the HTTP Client Factory login redacts header values by default. If we have a look at the description, the HTTP Client Factory default login includes trace level logs that output all the request and response headers. The redact logged headers method lets you specify which of these headers are sensitive. So essentially, when we're calling the redact logged headers, in this example, anything that starts with auth or x- will be redacted, and all the other headers will be left as they are. If we were to remove this line, all the headers would stay as they are. They would not be redacted. That was in .NET 8. But in .NET 9, there's slightly new behavior. If we don't include the redact logged headers, it will redact the headers all by default. The last one I want to have a look at is support for empty environment variables. And support was added to be able to set an environment variable to an empty string using environment.setEnvironmentVariable with 2 string parameters. If we have a look at the previous behavior, the setEnvironment variable, whether it was empty or null, deleted the environment variable. If we equaled it, it would set the environment variable in the child process to an empty value. That's regardless of whether it's null or string.empty. In .NET 9, if we use the set environment variable to string.empty, it sets the environment variable value to an empty value. If we set the environment value to null, the behavior is unchanged, that is, it still deletes the environment variable. If we equals it to null, it deletes the environment variable, and if it's set to empty, the behavior is unchanged, that is, it still sets the environment variable to an empty value. The release of .NET 9 brings many exciting changes, but should you upgrade? If your .NET application is still using .NET 7, then you really need to update. The reason being is that it's been out of support for some time. On the SDK page, we can see that the last release date was back in May 2024. So if you're using .NET 7, you need to update your .NET version. And some breaking news. The release of .NET 9 now means that .NET 6 is no longer supported by Microsoft. So you really ought to update to a supported version. And at time of recording, that is .NET 8 or .NET 9. But why should you update? Well, you could take advantage of some of the new features, like this new feature in .NET 9, where there is now support for Open API. There is also new link expressions in .NET 9, such as this count by expression. In this example, we have a list of customers, and it goes through each of the customers, and it counts by the individual surname. So for this, it would go through each surname. For Trump, it would say 2, and for Biden, it would say 1. It would output it into a dictionary and return the result. .NET 8 also had exciting new features, such as new exception handling middleware, and also keyed services that we mentioned earlier. You can watch videos for that on youtube.com/@roundthecode, and I'll leave a link for it in the YouTube video description. Another reason to update is security improvements. If we take a look at this release from October 2024, there are a number of .NET denial of service vulnerabilities that have been updated in .NET 6 and .NET 8. Notice they haven't been updated in .NET 7, and the reason being is that was out of support in May 2024. A number of the .NET updates focus around denial of service vulnerabilities. Now, if you don't know what denial of service is, you really should as a software developer. A denial of service attack, or DDoS attack, is an attempt to overload a website or network with the aim of degrading its performance or even making it completely inaccessible. It essentially means that it will flood your application with bogus traffic, meaning that your real users won't be able to access your application, or they'll find it very slow. So there are a couple of reasons why you should update your .NET version. But should you update to .NET 8, which has long-term support, or .NET 9 that has short-term support? If we have a look at the .NET versions, .NET 8 was released in 2023. It has 3 years support, so it's not out of support until November 2026. However, with .NET 9, despite being out a year later, the support for it runs out 6 months before .NET 8. So it really depends on your application. If you have a big application which takes a long time to update and you need to do a lot of testing, it's probably best to stick with the long-term support of .NET 8. But if you've got a small application and you've got time to keep on updating it, then maybe go with .NET 9 because you can take advantage of more of the new features. If you're using IIS to host and run your website, you'll need to take some steps to update your server so it supports .NET 9 applications. This is what you need to do. If you use Azure YAML pipelines to build and publish your .NET application and you're upgrading to .NET 9, you may need to include this line in your YAML pipeline. What this will do is it will download the SDK. This is particularly important if .NET 9 has just been released and you're trying to update. And it might be the case where the Azure agent doesn't have .NET 9 installed at this point, so this ensures that .NET 9 is installed on the agent. You'll also need to update the .NET version installed on your web server. Now for this, you'll need to install the ASP.NET Core Runtime, and if you're using IIS, you specifically need to install the Windows Hosting Bundle. This will ensure that IIS will support your .NET 9 application and will allow it to run. .NET releases come with new C# features. Watch this video next where you'll learn about some of the newest features that have been added in C#. And let me know in the YouTube comments whether you're going to be upgrading to .NET 9 or sticking with your current .NET version.